you're a friend. They trust you. So you take that trust and you monetize it, if I can use that term. And that's a little bit degrading, but it's what we do. And then you move to more and more sensitive information. You may transfer him to somebody else, turn him over, and then it goes to a higher and higher level. That's the recruitment process. And again, it's been working since the time of Phineas and Caleb. So, and it still works today. Does it work every time? Absolutely not.
You know, one thing I was thinking about as we were planning and I was prepping for this podcast is that it's amazing to me that something we do so often, which is communicate with other people on a daily basis, is something we don't really learn how to do. We don't train, we don't practice. I find that really, really fascinating.
And we're generally not very good at it. We are particularly not very good at the listening side, because that's never a skill that's taught to us unless it's our mother yelling at us that we better listen to her or we're going to get beat. Short of that, we don't spend any time developing listening skills, except for sometimes you can. Some people may. I have, just because they made us do that when I was in the agency, because we have to learn that. The biggest reason, in my opinion, that we're not good listeners is that in order to listen to you, I have to treat you as at least as important or knowledgeable as I am. In other words, I need to put my ego in check. And generally speaking, we're not very good at that, because ego is what drives us.
Yeah, you know, when you were talking about listening to your mother, even that is, in a lot of cases, more compliance, it seems like, than it would be what you would call active listening. I think active listening is actually an engagement with a dialogue and a conversation like we're having now, not do the dishes or you're grounded.
I would have to agree with that.
Yeah, so why, well, you talked a little bit about why we're not good at it, but it seems like it would be something that doesn't come natural necessarily, but that we just pick up over time because of I guess at the base level is a survival mechanism.
I think that's very true. We don't listen unless it's in our best interest. We don't do anything that's not in our best interest. And we have to understand that listening is in our best interest. And that's why you listen to your mom, because it's in your best interest. That's why you obey traffic signs and listen to the police officer, because it's in your best interest. So what we have to learn to do, and this is where it goes back to ego, we have to put our best interest to the side and listen to what that person's best interest is, or focus on what Ryan's best interest is, not just on what Jeffrey's best interest is.
Well, and I imagine also that in the agency, and you spent a lot of time in the military with the CIA as well, that when you were listening in that role, depending on who it was, you were trying to read between the lines and try to gather intel and information about potential threats. But when we're operating on a daily basis with our significant other or our colleagues, when we're listening, what is it that we would be listening for? And what lines are we trying to read between?
Well, that's very true. And what you have to do when you're listening is don't try to do that. Don't try and read between the lines, but actually just try and listen to what you're being told. Frequently, we spend so much time looking for the message between the lines that we miss the message entirely. So that's why sometimes you just have to simply listen to what they're saying and focus on what you're being told. And then that becomes an active listening. I mean, there's active listening is an exercise. So how do you active listen? Well, you make eye contact. You nod your head or make some kind of confirming reaction that, yes, I understand what you're telling me. So that begins to engage the listener with the speaker. And that's what we have to continue to do. And that's something that we're not generally taught.
I think one of the challenges that I've run into is that when you are listening to what they're saying, a lot of people aren't actually communicating what they're genuinely feeling or what they're experiencing, because they're running it through filters and they're trying to keep themselves protected. So if you're not reading between the lines, how do you get then to the root of issues that people might just be scratching the surface on?
Well, you brought a couple of good topics up, and this is one of the challenges we face when we're listening to somebody. One of the type of listeners that we ran into in the agency are what you call reloaders. They are not talking while I'm talking, but at the same time, they're not listening because they're busy reloading their response that they're going to shoot at me when I stop talking. So that's not even being a good listener to start with, although they're being quiet and maybe they're not in their head, but their thought
Sure.
process is not, what am I saying to them? So that's one of the first things we need to overcome. And after that, we do need to understand how to simply stop talking, stop reloading, and just listen to what we're being told.
With reloading, that's always been an interesting dynamic. I've never heard that term. I'm familiar with the concept. It just seems like if you're not thinking about your next question or your next point or your next idea, when somebody's done talking, then you just have this awkward silence of processing, or
Yes.
like it seems like there's a balance between, let me think about how I'm going to respond to this person while I'm actively listening to them.
We're very impatient. We want an immediate response, and we want to respond immediately. Instead of letting the gentleman or the lady or your colleague, boss, whatever, complete their thought, we're so busy thinking about the response that we're going to miss what they're saying. And at the same time, the speaker, who also has to be an active listener, has to allow the listener time to process. Sometimes that means the listener has to say, wait a second, hold on a second here. Let me think about this for a minute. So what you're saying is, and that's active listening, is repeating back what you heard in your own words. So what you're saying is that some people don't listen very well. Is that correct? And that's how you get the going back and forth and the dialogue, where you have an active dialogue. That's what we have to do. That's what we have to participate in, is an active dialogue where the person is listening, waiting for our response. I mean, I'm sure that you've been in meetings with your boss, whatever he was called, and when you're done talking to him, you stop talking. And the boss has all the time to process it he wants. He can sit there and go, and you're not going to talk anymore because that's not the nature of that relationship. And we have to apply that same submissiveness, if I can use that word, and I use that word very carefully, to the other relationships that we're having. And again, to be submissive or passive requires you to check your ego. So when I'm talking to my wife, I have to let her talk, let her get everything out, and boy, does she like to talk. But anyway, get everything out, and then when I'm sure she's done, I repeat the point back to her to make sure I understood. And that's an active dialogue. That's an active engagement. And, as the longer you're married, the better you get at it, the less dialogue time you actually need, because you can read body language and you know each other, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're not in that kind of relationship, you have to let that person finish speaking. And then when you're done speaking, they have to allow you time to process as well. We need to give each other time to process. We're not supercomputers that go at whatever speed. We have to think, well, how's that going to impact me? How's that going to impact my family or my kids? Okay, but what about this? Then again, that's where you get into the active dialogue.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And one thing I've often thought about too is that I've had to practice myself is not interrupting people, like letting them finish. But also, tell me what you think about this. There's a point at which somebody is just droning on and on and on and on and belaboring points that don't need to be belabored. Is that appropriate in those contexts to say, hold on, let's talk about what you just said before we move on to the next point? Or hold on, let me interrupt you to make sure I'm understanding.
There's nothing wrong or inappropriate with interrupting someone, politely, of course,
Sure, right.
interrupting someone and saying, wait, let me make, I did that to my wife. I think I did it not that long ago this morning. She made a point and she was well into her second point, and it's like, no, wait. You said this and what? And then we go on with the conversation. So there's nothing wrong with that. And that's why sometimes people talking tend to get so far ahead of themselves that they don't give the listener a chance to respond. This is where, again, you get down into your basic communications where you're listening and then you're talking and then you're being able to have a responsive dialogue, as opposed to sometimes, spouses don't have a responsive dialogue. They have the wife telling you what to do or the husband yelling back or whatever. So a good dialogue gives people time to respond. At the same time, a response doesn't need to beat the horse to death. And
Right.
and this is sometimes where we have problems because we tend to, depending on who it is, we tend to tune it out and go back to watching the TV show or reading a book or driving a car or whatever. So we just have to keep that in mind when we're the person that's delivering a point. Once you've delivered your point, chances are you can stop. Because if they're not going to change what they're doing after the point the first, 2 or 3 times, you need to have a different discussion.
Well, it seems like if you, and I'm guilty of this, but it seems like if you continue to belabor that point, not only are you not going to get the required, the desired result, you're actually probably going to build additional barriers and walls between you and who you're trying to communicate with. They'll shut down completely.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's absolutely correct. So if you're going to keep telling me that, I shouldn't be going so fast if I'm driving, it's like, I'm driving. Leave me alone. Or something to that effect. And yeah, it will shut down. And it doesn't enhance communication, especially in relationships that require communication, like a marriage or any kind of partnership.
Right. When you were talking earlier about this submissive term is what you used, and I know it was kind of maybe it's not the best term. The immediate thoughts, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about this, that came to mind is, number one, just a level of humility, and that's letting go of the ego, like you talked about earlier. But the other term that came to mind for me was assertiveness. I think a lot of the times we think that assertiveness is pressing forward in a respectful way, but I think being assertive is allowing people, in this context, the space they need to say what they want to say. Or if it's the case of an employer, to respect the authority or the position that you are both in.
Right. And that can be respect the position of an employee and my belief that this job won't work, or why is it this, whatever the problem may be that you're discussing. So yes, you do have to do that actively. You have to be an active listener and give people the opportunity. And that's something that we're not really great at because we don't practice those skills. Again, we go back
Right.
to your mother. You listen to me or else. That's not really teaching listening or communication. That's why college level courses, you have communication courses.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny that it would take that long. You get to 18, 19, 20 years old before you start having these lessons and instruction on how to communicate properly. But again, it's something that we do every single day, day in and day out, all the time.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things that in our training for the agency to be an intelligence officer, you have to learn to listen. And it's frequently challenging. But they expect you to do it anyway because that's your job. And if you can't check your ego, and that's one of the training at the farm that we went through to become operations officers. Frankly speaking, the first thing that they do is they pound your ego into submission, and then they slowly build it back up through the training process because you have to have a pretty good ego if you're going to go out and do what we were doing. But you get that ego beat out of you first, so that they can shape the ego the way they want it. But if you can't stand to have your ego beat, then that's not the path for you. And I knew people, there was one lawyer who was so impressed with himself as a lawyer that when it came to trying to get trained as a case officer, he was not able to be successful because he had this I'm a lawyer mindset, and that didn't work.
do you find that highly educated people tend to be more ego driven, or is that just a stereotype that doesn't really hold weight?
No, I haven't really seen that. In fact, I think the opposite may be true. In order to become highly educated, they have to go through a somewhat rigorous vetting process. I have my master's degree, and trust me, the process of writing and submitting a master's thesis is a lot of work, and you get asked a lot of hard questions. So I don't really think advanced education is an impact, and I would almost say that people with advanced educations are accustomed, they have to learn to listen to different viewpoints, or they're not going to be able to get the advanced education. Now, that's not to say that you don't have PhD holders out there who, for one reason or another, are difficult to communicate with. It could be that their focus is just so narrow that they can't communicate. University professors, by and large, have to be able to communicate. And so they learn that one way or the other, generally speaking. And I'm speaking somewhat broadly.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense, though. I think about it in the context of experts in other fields. Take somebody who's an expert at jiu-jitsu, for example. Most of the people who I know who are extremely proficient in martial arts are the most humble people I've ever met because of the requirement in order to get to that level of expertise required, to your point earlier, a beating down of the ego over decades and decades. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I think the same applies in education as well. So, yeah, you have someone who's got a PhD, but he's had to have his papers, assuming he went to a good university, everything he's written has been shredded and returned. And that's the other thing they did that's the other one. The other one of the two ways they beat our ego out of us was everything that was written just came back completely lined out with red ink, because they wanted it done a certain way. And if you weren't even, no one ever knows how to do that. It's a skill we have to learn. But again, if you're going to be offended by having your written word taken away from you, then you're in the wrong career field, because any report that is submitted, I can write it, I do my job, collect an intelligence report, and I submit it. It's going to go through a dozen hands before it gets into the hands of the senior policymaker. It's going to go through reports officers, it's going to go through senior operations officers, it's going to go through analysts, and it's all going to be probably not what you originally wrote. But that's okay. That's the process of making a better product. And this again goes back to ego. What do you mean a better product? It was my best writing ever. Well, yes and no. It might have been your best writing, but it didn't fit into the particular box we wanted it to fit in. So yes, of course we changed it. So you do have to become accustomed to that. You do have to let your ego go. And I think that is important in almost any relationship, is being able to let your ego go and take criticism. Nobody likes to be criticized, but we all, up until the day we die, can learn something from somebody else. And we have to learn that, and that can be a challenge as well. It's just something that comes with life. And if we are so, as an officer, an agency officer, if we're so wedded to our written word, we're going to be disappointed.
Or just wedded to our own way of doing it. You know, it's amazing to me, you enter into an organization, and sure, you bring a set of skills and characteristics that might be unique, and that might be a value add to the organization. But at the end of the day, it's that organization. You know, I see this in church. People come to church, a particular faith or denomination, and they say, well, I like everything but this. It's like, well, then go somewhere else, because this is how we do it here. And I imagine it's the same thing with the agency, or the same thing with a Fortune 500 company that somebody might work with. Like,
or the church
bring your
that
skills,
I go to.
but also, what's that?
Or the church that I go to. Well, I'm president of church
Right.
council, so it's like, well, we can't really fix that.
Yeah, well, there's you have a way of doing it, and sure, there's probably some areas where you're open to new insight. But when it comes to the gospel, for example, I would hope that it's a church that feels like they're pretty principled in their approach, at least on an ideological level.
Yep. And it should be well known what that level is, or at least no surprise. Once you've gone there 2 or 3 times, you should know what's coming at you.
Right. Well, I also think there's this growth mindset that people need to have as well. And I think that comes with the tearing down of your ego is, yeah, sure, it's not fun to be criticized or picked apart, but do you want to grow or do you want to be stagnant where you are?
And I mean, this is true in everything that we do. And, anybody that thinks that they can't improve themselves, even in a skill that they already have, they're just kidding themselves. I mean, I'm a firearms instructor. I actually took a good friend of mine to the gun range yesterday so he could get certified for his concealed carry permit in the state of Florida. And, no one's going to be perfect at the gun range. Someone's going to have better days. Someone's going to have, I go to the gun range frequently. Some days I have good days. Some days I don't have good days. And I can't get so wrapped around perfection, which we try to do. There was only one perfect man, and he was around about, 2,000 years ago? So we have to recognize we have shortcomings. I don't have as much hair as you do, and that's just who I am. And we have to be willing to accept our shortcomings, work on them, of course. That doesn't mean we don't try and improve, but we need to recognize that we can always improve. We can always get better. We can always do something better. So, and that's again that hard ego lesson.
What was your role in the agency? I mean, you spent time in the military and then you started working with the agency. What was it that you were doing there?
I was not in the military. Let me clarify that. I was never in the military.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that you were for some reason.
No, sir. I was in the Peace Corps, and then I was in the private sector, and then I went into the agency. My role in the agency, I was an operations officer. It was my job to steal secrets and recruit spies. It was lots of fun, and I want to thank you and your listeners for paying their taxes because it let me and my family have a good life. And it's quite interesting. It was very interesting work. I focused largely on the weapons of mass destruction, the WMDs of the world, and in preventing their transfer and movement to countries that we don't want to have them. And it was fascinating work. And I can tell you, and I would like your audience to know that the rank and file people that are in the agency are the best Americans we could ever want there. In fact, a colleague of mine and I are working on writing a book, and it's not going to be about anything operational. It's going to be about the personalities of the people that we engaged with when we were both in the agency. And some of them are just awesome, fascinating. These are third generation folks that worked in the agency. Wonderful people. Is everybody there wonderful? No, goodness, no. They have more than their fair share of wankers and egos and everything else. But by and large, it is the best of the best because they screen for education, they screen for personality, they screen for many things that allows them to have the best of the best people come in there. And then the same goes with the promotion process, the retention and promotion process. So there are some fascinating people. I mean, I knew one third generation lady who was ethnic Lebanese, and like all Lebanese women, she was a stunning beauty. But sweet as the day is long, and she became good friends with me, and she actually worked for me. So we had some engaging conversations because she wanted to become an operations officer. She wanted to get into training. And so I took her into my office and closed the door very carefully, knowing that I was going to step onto a landmine if I wasn't careful. And I said, when you go for the interview, button one more button. And I was just being friendly. I was, it's like, please don't tell anybody I said that because it cost me my job. But she knew the point I was making. Again, she was very attractive, but she needed to sideline that just a little bit because if she wanted to get into the program. And I don't know if she ever did or not because, the agency people move on all the time. But there were other fascinating people that I worked with. As I said, the gentleman I actually had lunch with him yesterday. He and I have known each other for more years than I'm actually allowed to say. So it's one of those long-standing friendships. And it's a long-standing friendship because of shared experiences and shared outlooks and perspectives. I'm sure you have the same kind. So we're going to work on a book that's just going to be, I think the title of it's going to be Two Old Spies Walk into a Bar. and two old spies meet in a bar, I should say. And then we just start talking. And we just talk about, well, you remember this? I just told you about one young lady. Remember this young lady? Or do you remember that young person? Or this guy and how much fun he was? And how this guy wasn't the sharpest pencil in the drawer. We can never figure out what he... That's what the book's going to be about. It's going to be about personalities. And that's not to say there's any right or wrong answer, because there isn't. Personalities, I'm sure you've engaged all types, particularly in what you do now. And we're just going to talk about some of the many different personalities that we ran into and how much fun it was. It was a great career. It was lots of fun, lots of entertaining people. Were all of them perfect? No. Did I want to take a couple out back and have a discussion with them? Yeah. But by and large, outstanding people. And again, that's the message I'd like to deliver is, by and large, you have an outstanding cadre of people that work at the agency, that are working on behalf of the American people, that work long hours. I just wrote a paper for a presentation I'm going to give in San Diego at the end of this month, and I talk about the fact that I had my team in for 7 days a week for a month because of what we were working on. We were monitoring some shipping. And then the problem resolved itself, the operation ended, and the next day, or 2 days later, my boss said, you have to bring your team in this weekend again. And I said, no, sir, I'm not going to do that. I'll come in, but not my team. And, I would have to take care of whatever problem there was. And he had enough confidence in me that he accepted that response because he knew I'd take care of the problem.
Sure.
But it also bordered on insubordination. But again, sometimes that's what you have to do to take care of your people.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's two ways to look at that with your boss. In order for him to accept that response, there had to have been experience knowing that, okay, well, I know he'll get it done. So that's on one hand. And that's a level of trust that you built up over years, if not decades, I imagine. And then on the other hand, with your team, that's also a trust building opportunity because they know that you're not going to throw them under the bus or make them do things that aren't in their best interest, and that you are going to lead from the front. That's an impressive story.
The good leaders lead from the front. I hate to say it. This lead from behind is a myth, and it never really works.
Yeah. When you talk about personalities, hiring for personalities within the agency, were there certain, and of course, there's a lot of different personalities and a lot of different roles within the agency as well that I imagine require a different set of personalities and characteristics. But generally speaking, are there some common threads that the agency is looking for when it comes to the type of people they hire?
Well, I can only really address operations officers. And we're actually, I think, the smallest group of employees. They have literally tens of thousands of analysts. But the collectors that are out in the field tend to be a relatively small number. And yes, there are certain characteristics that they hire for. Minimum college degree is one thing. You have to have at least a bachelor's, and they really prefer masters. So you have to be well educated. And being well educated doesn't mean that you know a lot of facts. What that means is you know how to think and apply processes to getting jobs done. Because I'm going to guess that you are familiar with the story of Rahab and Phineas and Caleb and Jericho, and when the walls came tumbling down. Rahab was the harlot, Phineas and Caleb were the two spies that Joshua sent in to Jericho. They did that 3,500 years ago. So how long has espionage been around? Which is the world's oldest
very
profession?
Long time.
Is it prostitution or is it espionage? And, we've been working together for 3,500 years. So there are some characteristics like that they have to appeal to. So again, education is one of them. Personality ability. You have to be able to talk to people. If you can't talk to people, you're not going to really be able to get the job done. You have to have the ability to write and to understand the questions that you're being asked. Keep in mind, as an operations officer, I didn't come up with the questions that I was going to ask the assets that I was handling. That was done by the analysts or the congressional staffer, whatever, who said, gosh, I wonder about this. And then that question filtered its way down to me. And I had to put that question into terms that the source was going to be able to respond to. So again, you have to be able to think through, you have to be able to understand and simplify complex topics, whether it's weapons of mass destruction research programs, or telecommunications networks, or military planning. You have to be able to break those down into individual questions that an asset can respond to. So, does that mean you need to have a PhD in nuclear physics? No. But you have to be able to think about, okay, how do I break this topic down into questions that the asset can respond to? Then you have to be able to ask those questions and write the response. The biggest skill for an intelligence officer, and they told me this when I first interviewed, was writing. This was, I'm not going to tell you how long ago, a long time ago, but I was also told, learn how to type. There's a reason for that. Everything's done on a computer these days. You have to be able to type if you're going to hunt and peck like this, and I knew guys like that.
It's too long.
They were all night at the farm through training because they're doing this. So again, fundamental skills like being able to write is just so important, and we don't do a good job of teaching it on a general level. Of course, there are English programs and such that do a good job, but by and large, to get a bachelor's degree, you take one English class, maybe an English literature class. It's got nothing to do with writing. So you have to be a good writer and be able to develop that skill if you don't have it, because everything is done in the written word. It doesn't matter. You can, have an asteroid land in your backyard, but if it's not in an intelligence report in the proper written format, no one's going to know about it because no one cares.
It didn't happen.
They're not going to read it.
Right. Well, and I imagine too, there's a heavy emphasis on, tell me if I'm wrong, but more of the softer skills than the harder skills. Anybody can learn to type. You can learn that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't come with some of those hard skills already well established, but I imagine it's infinitely harder to come up with a intelligent list of questions to ask your assets, for example. And then there's language and cultural barriers and walls that a person has to adapt and overcome. So I imagine that's infinitely harder to train than teaching somebody to write or type, 70 words a minute or whatever it is.
I don't disagree with anything that you're saying. Yes, that is the skill, the interpersonal skills that you're describing are critical. And that if you don't have them, you're not going to be successful. But the same applies to communication skills. If you can't communicate the intelligence that you've obtained, then you're not going to be successful either. And there are certain formats that are required when you're submitting your emails and your intelligence reports. And it's that way because you have people in the agency that read up to 200 reports a day. So I had a guy work for me. He just got his master's degree, and his very first report that he wanted me to send out, his first email that I had to approve sending out was like, are you kidding me? Try again. Take out all these $10 words and let's use simple sentences. When I became a supervisor, I learned the difference between compound, complex, and whatever the other one is, sentences. We had to write simple sentences so people could read them. And when I had people working for me, if I counted more than 4 lines in one sentence, I kicked it back because they're not going to be able to read it. I remember getting a report about someone in Europe that had gone to a meeting. Its officer submitted a report. He'd gone to a meeting, and the first 2 paragraphs were all about the traffic getting to the meeting. I had no idea what the 3rd paragraph said because I quit reading it. I didn't have time. If he was going to waste my time reading about traffic, he's not a serious officer, and he needs to go back to school and figure out how to submit those kind of reports. There's a place for it, absolutely, But by and large, they need to learn. I mean, we call it PT Buff, which stands for put the benefits up front. So if I'm reading something, I need to see, it needs to say, so this happened on this day and this is the problem. Okay, then I'll keep reading. But to say traffic was oh so bad on the highway, I just quit reading.
Well, I imagine that's pretty, but not I imagine. It is actually applicable to ordinary everyday civilians as well.
Absolutely.
If you're sending an email to even a text to a friend about a get together you're having, or an email to your boss about the new project and how that's working, like PT Buff, like you said, put the benefits up front.
And if you make it easy for them to get the benefits, then they will appreciate your communication skill. And at the end of the day, when it comes promotion time, that will make a difference. You know, how well does this colleague communicate with his superiors, his subordinates, and his colleagues? And if everybody said, yeah, this guy's a good communicator, then that's going to make a difference. And when they see people like that being promoted, that's going to make a difference.
Was there, or I should say, how much consideration was given to the line between a person's ability to comply and their ability to, for lack of a better term, to rebel or to deviate when appropriate?
So let's go back to the story of Phineas and Caleb. They were vegetable salesmen in Jericho. That was their cover. And the thing you have with intelligence officers, and this is something that the CIA is exceptionally good at, is they give the officer in the field 100% latitude. Whatever decision I make in the field is a decision that I made in the field. Now, am I going to explain why I made this decision? Absolutely. And so this happened, and I did this, and I did this, and I did this. This was the outcome. Okay. They accept that. I want to say at face value, but that seems to diminish it when you say that. They accept that as the written truth, because one thing that they require as much as anything else is integrity. So they have to know that I am being completely forthcoming, good news or bad news, in whatever emails or report I'm submitting. And we all have bad news. Bad things happen to us in work all the time, particularly when you're in a field that is as rife with landmines as intelligence. I tell people this. I tell this in writing, in my reports on leadership, my presentations on leadership. If you're not making a mistake once in a while, you're not really trying your best. And that was the lesson that I taught people. And let me just give you a quick example. I had a lady come to me one day and say that we're tracking a shipment of WMD related goods, and it was coming from Asia going to someplace in the Middle East where we didn't want it. She came to me and said, I think it's probably already gone. We're probably not going to be able to interdict it or do anything about it. So I just wanted to let you know. And my response was, no, ma'am. We swing at every pitch. You get the email out all along the route you think this thing's going. Let's get everybody looking at this, see what we can do about it. I had empowered her to fail. I'd said, we're going to do this anyway. So if it's a failure, it's not her responsibility, it's mine. Because I said, we're going to do this anyway. So by empowering her to fail, she went back, she did what needed to be done, the word got out, and the next morning she came to me and said, Chief, we caught it. We caught it, we turned it around, and we sent it back home, for which she got a performance award. So you empower your people to fail, which means they're going to take chances and try harder. And when they succeed, you reward them. This is not PhD level leadership or management. This is common sense. Anybody who's had kids should know, you want your child to try. Oops, he fell. Oh, well, get up, stop crying, dust yourself off, let's try again. And right. That's how we want to encourage our employees as well. They're going to fall once in a while, and we're going to pick them up and dust them off. If they fall all the time, we need to have a different discussion. But if they're not falling once in a while, they're not trying to run fast enough or whatever. You understand my analogy. So that's just a very important, it was important to me. There were two statements that got people kicked out of my office when I first started working at headquarters. We've never done it this way. We've always done it this way. Those are the death knell of innovation and creativity. And I only had to kick two people out of my office for saying that. And they never said it in my office again because I want them to come with crazy ideas. When I took over a very large office in Northern Virginia, the first thing I did when I had a big staff meeting was I said, everybody stand up, move your chairs, pick up the table, put the table against the wall, bring the tables back in the middle. So we just all sat in chairs around nothing. Well, the idea is there's nothing to stop communication. There's nothing between us. A good idea can come from anybody at any level. You can have the newest, most junior graduate from the farm come in and say, what about this idea? And everybody goes, that's a great idea. We never thought of that. But if you have barriers to that, and whether they be a physical barrier like a table or an office door or whatever it may be, or the mental barrier, well, he's the boss and got to be careful. Don't say that to the boss.
Right.
That stifles creativity. And back to Phineas and Caleb. 3,500 years ago, you don't think we have to keep reinventing good ways to collect intelligence? Absolutely we do. The old rules apply, but we still have to become creative and come up with new and better ideas, or new ideas. Not necessarily better ideas, but new ideas on how to do our jobs.
It is interesting because it seems to me in culture, we generally tend to over-index failure, and we put so much emphasis on failure. Now, I know that the stakes that you were playing were probably a little greater than maybe most of us play. I also think maybe a brain surgeon has a greater stake in not making a mistake than I do, for example. But generally speaking, it's really okay to fail, and it's not most of the time that big a deal if you can learn some lessons from it. You can be unique or creative in trying ideas that maybe stick or don't. It just seems that goes back to the growth mindset that we were talking about earlier.
And in the agency, one of the ways they reduced failure is through the approval process. And I think your brain surgeon is a good example. A brain surgeon is not by himself. He has another doctor there with him. He has a anesthesiologist. He's got a nursing staff. And they're not quite on equal footing, but they are sort of. So the nurse can say, hey, you left a scalpel inside, or whatever the case may be. And as a supervisor, I want someone to say, hey, you left a scalpel inside, to protect me from my own mistakes. And that's how we work as a team. We protect each other from our own shortcomings because we all have them. We may say, no, I don't have any shortcomings. I'm the best thing since sliced bread, but that's a lie. So we have teams to protect ourselves. We have, whether it's a secretary or assistant manager or whatever, however you want to call them, that's protecting us and helping us do a better job.
Yeah. Well, to shift gears a little bit, I've always been a little bit curious about how you were able to enlist. The term you've used is assets, and how you're able to enlist assets or spies, those people with secrets that were willing to give them up to the United States, with some of those cultural barriers and with some of loyalty to other countries and upbringings and religious perspectives. That seems like such a tall order. I've always been curious how you enlist and recruit those individuals.
You are correct in your assumption that it is not a straightforward, easy daily activity.
I bet.
There is a system. It's called spot, assess, develop, recruit, handle, terminate. That's what's known as the asset cycle. First, Congressman Jones says, hey, I want to know about this that they're doing in that country. Okay. Requirement goes out to the field. Chief of station goes, okay, can we answer these questions? Well, the reports officer says, no, we don't have any assets that can respond to those questions. Okay, where do we find them? And then the operational process begins. And it is a complex process. It starts with spotting. What does that mean? That means that a whole bunch of smart people, some of the operations officers, like myself, will sit around and go, hey, I know we're looking for somebody, I'll use an easy one. We're looking for somebody in the Ministry of Defense. So there's a Ministry of Defense reception for the embassy Friday night. So I'm going to go and see what I can find. And so, they go to these receptions, and sure enough, there's 3 people from the Ministry of Defense. And so they begin a relationship. That's the spotting part. So they've spotted them, they get their name, they get, whatever idea, business card, whatever they have. They exchange business cards.
Sure.
Then they take a look at that person into the files. What has this person done in the past? Have they tried to approach this person in the past? And if so, what was the outcome? Did he shrug it off, non-responsive, not interested? Did he call and complain to the boss? Did he call the ambassador and say, hey, you guys talking to me like this, and I don't like that? No. So what is the history with this guy, if any? And then, assuming everything comes back, then, the people, the analysts at headquarters are going to take a look and say, okay, it looks like this guy may have access to what we want to know. Okay. Then begins the developmental process. No, spot assess. Then begins the assessment process. So you're talking to him, you take him to lunch, take him to dinner, whatever. And again, you're filling this assessment in. If the guy is picture perfect, has a perfect marriage, is financially happy, and has no problems in life, then that's going to be tough. However,
right. There's no reason for an individual like that to flip or anything like that, I imagine.
It doesn't always work to his advantage. And believe it or not, everybody does what's to their advantage. You do, I do, everybody does.
Of course. Yeah.
So then the information comes back after several lunch, whatever meetings. So I hate using this, but it does clarify the topic. His child's sick. They can't afford the doctor. Well, we're happy to help with that. By the way, there's an embassy doctor that would be more than happy to take a look and make recommendations. And all of a sudden, you're taking this gentleman into a safe house, and the doctor comes in, and it comes in with the wife and the daughter or whatever, the child, and the doc looks at him and says, sure, I got this. I'll take care of it. Let me get the meds back at the embassy, and we'll send them out to you. So all of a sudden, you have a very different level of a relationship. The trick is to move the relationship from a business level meeting, yes, I'm trying to sell this or this or that, to a personal level. How's your son? Or your daughter? Is he okay? Did the medicine help? And so you begin that personal relationship. And then, again, this takes time. And then, somebody has a birthday coming up. Oh, your daughter's birthday is next month. What can I get her? Get her a nice gift. Your wife's birthday is coming up. What can I get you? Get her a nice gift. So you begin an exchange of gifts. It tends to be one way. But again, it helps them develop a sense of their importance to the officer. That's the developmental process. And then while you're going through that, you may say, so, I know you work in the office, and if this makes you uncomfortable, we don't have to talk about it, but I was just curious, what about this policy on narcotics, since they don't collect on narcotics anymore? They used to, they don't anymore. They put that aside after 9/11. What about your government's policy on narcotics? Do you see that changing anytime soon? Well, and then you begin the discussion on collecting the intelligence. And then you go down that path a couple times, and then it's like, well, that information that you provided really made a lot of people happy, and so they wanted me to give you this little gift, and it's, $100, $500, $1,000, whatever's appropriate. And then all of a sudden they see dollar signs, and you're a friend. They trust you. So you take that trust and you monetize it, if I can use that term. And that's, again, that's a little bit degrading, but it's what we do. You monetize the trust, you develop a relationship, and then you move to more and more sensitive information. You may transfer him to somebody else, turn him over, and then it goes to a higher and higher level. That's the recruitment process. And again, it's been working since the time of Phineas and Caleb. So, and it still works today. Does it work every time? Absolutely not. That's why it tends to be a slow process. So that if you realize you're starting to get on somebody's nerves, that they either redirect or pull back. I had a gentleman I was developing, and everything was going great. And he was a military officer, going great. And then all of a sudden, I asked him about their missile defense system. Wow. He went berserk on me. Why do you want to know that? What? I mean, he let go on me. And of course, then I'm doing the famous backup two-step. Sorry. So you do the backup two-step, you readjust, and then you continue on. And that's what happened. I readjusted. We continued the discussion. We continued the relationship. But I never asked him that question again. So I found the limit. Again, if you're not failing once in a while, you're not testing your limits.
How often does it come up where an officer, I think, is that the right term? Like an officer?
Yes, we're intelligence officers. Okay. FBI has agents. We have officers.
Got it. So how often would it be the case that an officer would get so close to this person on a personal level that the officer becomes ineffective or compromised? Is that fairly common?
No, it's extremely uncommon. Not saying it never happens. Aldrich Ames, I think, was the last one that I can think of who became so enamored with his asset that he married that he began working for the Russians. Yeah, that was a big mess. And
when was that?
A lot of people. What's that?
When was that?
Where was I? Was it 95, I think?
Okay, yeah.
Something like that.
So quite a while. Yeah, quite a while.
You know, they still have officers that screw up, but he working for the Russians is not screwing up. That's a whole different topic. And as you can imagine, it cost millions and millions of dollars to fix the damage that he created. When you're in a personal business, and again, this is why when you're in the organization, you're under a lot of scrutiny. Whether it's reporting your financial records, how often? I think every 5 years we had to provide our financial records. Or
your personal financial records.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
And again, you take a polygraph. There's ongoing assessments. Your boss is paying attention. Everybody's paying attention because we're all looking for the next counterintelligence threat. And that's not to say that we don't trust each other. We do. It's not to say we don't develop close personal relationships with one another. We do. But we also pay attention to, and we can see the signs. If someone's going to slip up, it's like, we need to take a look at this guy and find out what his deal is. Because we want to save him. We want to protect him. If this guy suddenly find out, say he's having real financial issues, why? What caused it? How can we help? That's the first response. And then if it gets out of hand, that's a different story entirely. But
the financial issues would potentially represent a vulnerability. Is that why you would look at that?
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
And see, that's one of the myths. I hate to say it. The myth is it's all about the money. It's not. It's all about the ego. And even when we do paperwork on people we recruited, which they have to do it every year, the question is, it's written, how much money does it take to control him? The truth is, we're never controlled by money. We're influenced, but we're never controlled by it. And it's the personality and the relationship between the officer and the asset that has the greatest influence. And that's, again, it goes back to that's why we have such a strict vetting process, a strict training process, and a strict oversight process. So we can make sure that that's all going in the right direction.
What are other, you had said that you look for individuals who might be slipping up or falling behind. You talked about financial constraints. Are there other red flags that would notify you like, oh, this is a person we need to keep our eye on or have a conversation with?
We go through regular training, annual training, and there's a couple indicators. One is finances. A second indicator is working a weird schedule. Why are they always coming in late and leaving late when everybody else is already gone? What are they doing there by themselves? So again, weird work schedule is one to look at. Potential relationship issues, although that's a little bit harder to pin down because not everybody's going to talk about the relationship with their husband or their wife or whatever the case may be. So those are also things that we look at, but those are the big ones. Are they leaving early, coming in late? Do we know of any strain? Are they asking weird questions? Are they asking questions that are inappropriate? That's something else. I mean, why would this officer be asking about this case? It's nothing to do with him or where he is or what he's supposed to be dealing with. Why is he asking these questions? So it's things like that. And 99 times out of 100, there is a perfectly good, legitimate answer to that question. It's,
Sure.
Well, he's put in for a transfer to go work in this division. They told him they need to talk to the guys that are doing it. So again, perfectly legitimate answer. It's that 1 out of 100 that causes problems.
It sounds like basically you're looking for the same qualities and characteristics or circumstances that you're looking at in a potential asset.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, like what an interesting line of work. It's hard for most people to fathom, but it is interesting as we have this conversation at how that is applicable even to somebody like me that has employees. Now, I'm not overly concerned with being taken advantage of financially necessarily. I have checks and balances in place, but also there are things that I want to be aware of in my professional and personal relationships that I might just be able to help somebody with. If one of my kids is acting strange, I should be aware of that so I can confront it. Or if one of my employees is having a hard time, but it would be good for me to know so I could help that person.
There's two things. First, when I retired and I told my sister what I retired from, her immediate response was, "You mean like Jason Bourne?" Yes, just like that. In training, they teach us to ride motorcycles across rooftops. No, nothing like that whatsoever. Yeah, that was pretty funny. But we have to learn how to pay attention to people. And there's this thing called management by walking around. That became a famous term back when I was in college, so 40, 50 years ago. So as a supervisor, as an employer, I'm hoping that you don't spend all your time in the office with the door closed, because that's just not going to tell you what you need to tell yourself. And it goes back to the open door policy. And when I was a manager and a group chief, yeah, I had a door that closed, but it was open all the time. If it was closed, there was a reason for it. And at least twice a day, usually more like 5 or 6 times a day, I just take off, walk around, say, "Hey, how you doing?" Because I had, I don't remember, I had about 50 people working for me in that office. So I just walk around and say, "How you doing? What's going on?" And most of the time, I get grunts and responses because people are busy or whatever. But it's being accessible, which is something that you as an employer, as a supervisor, need to be. The employee needs to know that if their son or daughter is sick, they can come in, close the door, and say, "Chief, my daughter's real." I had my daughter needed what she had. She had most of the large lobe of her liver removed because she had liver cancer. She had a single tumor. Praise God, she survived and she's fine. But imagine going to your boss and saying, "Yeah, my daughter's in Johns Hopkins Hospital and she's having surgery tomorrow." What do you suppose my boss's response was? "Well, what the heck are you doing here? Get out of here. We don't want to see
As
you
it should
for at
be.
least 2 weeks. Go, gone." He didn't get out a checklist and say, "Do you have sick leave?" He didn't care.
Right.
Yeah, he get out of here. Go take care of your family. And obviously, I still remember that to this day, and that's been over 2 decades. But it's that kind of support when personal issues come up that breed loyalty. And again, I knew this boss. I had worked for him for a while in a couple different capacities. And so when he heard that, it's like, what are you doing here, Jeff? Go. And that gave me free reign, or gave me license to take what I needed to take care of my family. The flip
Right.
side of that is it gave my boss license to say, you're good, family's good, everybody's happy, glad to hear it. Come on and work this weekend. Okay.
Now get back to work.
Yeah, it's the other side of the coin. He wants loyalty. He got loyalty out of me. I can absolutely guarantee that.
I bet. Well, Jeffrey, I appreciate you taking some time to talk with us today. You've got a fascinating career. I'm always interested in these unique angles and perspectives and things that we can learn. How do we connect more with you? I know you are in the process of, I don't know how far in the process you are of brainstorming, or you've been writing your book, but how do guys, oh, you have it right there.
So it's Human for Humanity. And human is what I collected. I collected human intelligence. Because you have SIGINT, which is signals intelligence, OSINT, which is open source intelligence. I collected human. And so Human for Humanity talks almost nothing about what I did for the agency, but what it talks about is what are some of the different places I've been to. I started my adult life as a Peace Corps volunteer in North Africa. So that's where I learned Arabic. And then I didn't want to go back to Ohio, so I went to Central Africa and learned French. And then I finished up my degrees and I went other places. And I've been blessed, and I do treat it as a blessing, by being able to see the world at a level that most people have not. Now, I haven't seen everything. I don't have all the answers. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I've seen bits and pieces of the world that most people have not. My wife, now my ex-wife, has experienced things in places of the world that most people never have. I'll give you a quick example. We were in New Delhi, and we'd been there about 9 months. Her parents sent a Christmas package. And of course, we get the little notice in the mail that says, come pick up your package. And this is fascinating to us because in Delhi, they carry refrigerators on mopeds. And you're telling me that the post office can't, what did they send us? A container? So she goes down to the post office with her little slip and, of course, her passport, and goes in and shows it to them. And they take one look at it and go, that's not your name. My in-laws had addressed it to our youngest daughter, who was 13 months old at the time. And so the guy's like, that's not your name, so that passport isn't going to do you any good. They wouldn't give it to her. She had to go back home, collect my 13-month-old daughter, and you know how happy 13-month-old daughters can be. Go down to the post office and stand in a line, which means a crowd again, and with holding on to the daughter while she's not very happy being held onto. Gets up there, holds the passport up, holds our daughter up, and the guy goes, okay, so they bring out the box, they give her the box, she signs whatever, takes the box, comes home, opens it up, the box is empty, except for one piece of wrapping paper. They'd stolen everything out of it.
Oh, no.
My ex-wife, and my book is actually dedicated to my ex-wife because of all the stuff she went through so I could play at the job I played at. and it's just things like that most people can't even fathom. In India, again, I hate to pick on India because it's a lovely country, but if you put a letter with a stamp on it into a post office box, by the time that gets to the post office, they're going to take that stamp off, throw the letter away, and resell the stamp. So these are just things that you have to learn. Again, I'm not being critical. That's just reality. We saw it happen. And every country has its downside, the U.S. included. I mean, we're far from perfect. So what I'm trying to do is give people a feel for the humanity that we live in and that we see. And we've got some fascinating places out there. Did you ever read Sinbad the Sailor?
No.
You should. It's Sinbad the Sailor is the story of the 1001 Arabian Nights. He sailed from Oman, and Oman is a fascinating country, a lovely country. It's right on the Saudi Peninsula. It's got an old history. The people are wonderful and friendly, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I try and address in this book, is give people a taste and a flavor for some of the places in the world.
Well, we'll sync it all up so guys know where to go, because there is a lot. I've traveled abroad just a very little bit over the past couple of years, which is relatively new for me. And I can tell you some of the experiences and cultures that I've seen is absolutely incredible. So I would encourage a lot more guys to do that. Jeffrey, thanks again for joining me. I appreciate you taking some time today.
It's my very great pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.